One of the goals of good decision making in asset management is the ability to push decision making down to those within the organisation that really understand the technical, the commercial, and the full spectrum to the underpinning decision. We need to be looking at using clear criteria, evaluating options, balancing out not just the desired balance, but the appropriate balance of cost, risk, and performance. What is the business case for change? How do we justify the investments? How do we justify a particular direction? Looking at the life cycle impacts, for instance, not just short-termism, short-term cost, and balancing out the important versus the urgent. Ensuring that decisions are made by the right people with the right information, but also, too, the right competencies. We wouldn't ask an electrician to create a decision on something mechanical and vice versa. So we need to make sure that people understand when they're making a decision, what's their accountability and responsibility in doing so. And then, of course, being able to track those decisions and confirm they actually did deliver the expected value. And as we say, measuring the delivery of our plans and measuring the intent of our plans and the initial decisions that supported them. There is a real risk that different teams, different functions throughout the organisation across the life cycle use different criteria, different frameworks, which does create inconsistency, misalignment, and sometimes can bias the use of resources across the organisation and across the life cycle. So we really need to get clarity of the criteria going into decisions, establishing shared decision-making frameworks, prioritisation frameworks, and making staff are at least aware of them, if not training their staff of how to use them. Because clarity of criteria really simply at the first part should fall back to your asset management objectives, especially if they follow the SMART principle out of your strategic asset management plan. A risk that all organisations face is the consistency, the trust, the leadership, the alignment when we balance trade-offs between various decisions, their impacts, the roadmap moving forward. We need to really understand there is a key risk in terms of short financial gains, overriding that longer term asset and service performance, and of course, sustainability. To get around this, we can structure trade-off discussions, and it really shouldn't be a negotiation based across one function to another function. It should look at what is the value to the organisation, the value to stakeholders through services and products, and then unpacking it back against cost, risk, and performance. So again, balancing off trade-offs and done in a transparent manner will actually further align stakeholders, and they won't feel it's a competition, but rather alignment for value. The old squeaky wheel gets the grease, the loudest stakeholder, etc. But we really do run a risk in all organisations that decisions can be dominated by one particular function. It might be a bias towards finance, bias towards engineering, maybe even a bias towards sales. But we do need to have that balanced input. And we can do that when we consider a cross-functional engagement. It very much underpins the whole coordinated activity of an organisation to realise value. So, as you can see here, one way through this is, of course, looking at a multidisciplinary decision-making group, steerco, various groups by various names, but those that can actually start to look at decisions across the life cycle of assets, across the life cycle of services, and therefore start brokering with various functions how we support changes moving forward. Some decisions will be made by top management for very important reasons, sometimes political reasons, sometimes trade-offs for external stakeholders. But where a decision is being made internally that it won't harm certain functions to understand the background to a decision, it's important to include people. Transparency and trust in any organisation can be lost very quickly if people feel that decisions are being made on their behalf without their input. We can get around this again by communicating, understanding the rationale behind certain decisions. Again, that clearly and openly through transparency, trust, good leadership, explaining why a certain decision might have been made. I've had to do this before myself in my career, explain there are reasons above our pay grade, or from a short-termism point of view, we're being asked just to do what we've been asked to do, and at a later point in time, we'll bring in more transparency around decision making. Again, having that conversation, people will appreciate it, and you don't lose or create disengagement among the workforce in doing so. It's one thing to actually make a decision. It's another thing for people to be both confident, competent, and capable of making a decision. So the risk here is that staff do lack the skills to do so, especially in support of evidence-based decisions. A subject matter expert may actually be more biased towards an answer because they feel more comfortable in their own function. So a remedy to this would be, of course, to provide training, how to write, create, and understand a business case and how it stacks up, looking at life cycle management, life cycle costing, and also to both risk and opportunity analysis. Now, once a decision is made, it shouldn't just be set and forget, buy, hope, and pray, and follow a process. What we really need to do is understand how we track that decision. If a decision really forms, even if it's a small business case, well, we want to be able to track it. We want to be able to measure the intent of that decision. The risk here is, of course, when it's not tracked, decisions aren't learned from. We could have done things differently. We could have got a better outcome. So we talk about this post-decision reviews, but even benefit realization or a realization consideration against the business case at any point of a project or a rollout of any change can be very beneficial. And then really importantly, as we come back to that whole plan, do, check and act, how do we share the learnings across the organization in a transparent, visible manner? So as relate decision making back to ISO, in particular the 2024 version, section 4.5, which is a new edition, we're looking at asset management decision making, and within that, framework and of course criteria. Section 6.1 to address risk, and section 6.2 to address objectives, and of course planning to achieve them. And then section 8.1, operational planning and control, including that life cycle management. So this decision making is really throughout the entire organization, whether that's a strategic decision, a tactical decision, or the resourcing of operations decision. So in summary, decision making in asset management is all about choosing the best option to deliver value for the organization, its stakeholders for today and into the future. And decision making should consider cost, risk, and performance in today's terms, and cost, risk, and performance in future terms.